Moments up. Welcome back to Grockit OG TV. This is the GMAT edition where we're going through the official guide to the test, question by question. My name is Jim Jacobson, and I will be your teacher slash tutor slash broadcaster right now. So when we left off last time, we were still in the critical reasoning section of the beginning of the book, at the diagnostic test at the beginning. We were on page 39. And we were about to do question number 33, finishing up this section, and then hopefully soon finishing up the diagnostic test. Get our answer choices on the board. It is worth your time to jot down on your notes whenever you're taking practice questions. Jot down answer choices so you can cross off ones that you've already eliminated for whatever reason. It improves your speed of guessing and prevents you from wasting time rereading questions and answer choices, that you've already eliminated, especially when it comes to things that can often look very similar, like in sentence correction. It can be a real time saver over the course of the whole test. Highly recommend writing down just A, B, C, D, E, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you can knock things out. Anyway, on with the show. Number 33. During the 1980s and 1990s, the annual number of people who visited the Sordellian Mountains increased continually, and many new ski resorts were built. Over the same period, however, the number of visitors to ski resorts who were caught in avalanches decreased, even though there was no reduction in the annual number of avalanches in the Sordellian Mountains. Which of the following, if true in the Sordellian Mountains during the 1980s and 1990s, most helps to explain the decrease? So the decrease we're after here is the decrease in the number of visitors caught in avalanches, even though there are more people and the same number of avalanches. So we would need something that perhaps makes the avalanches less dangerous, something that makes them less likely to catch people. That's the sort of, whenever we can, we want to predict the sort of answers that we are going to come across. So we need something that makes the avalanches less dangerous despite more people and the same frequency of the disasters. So choice A. Avalanches were most likely to happen when a large new snowfall covered an older layer of snow. So this is historical information about the nature of avalanches, and that may well be true of avalanches. I'm not actually sure. I'm not an avalanche expert. However, this would be true both before the 1980s and 1990s and after. This is just how avalanches are. This doesn't make them less dangerous or somehow less likely to catch people despite an increasing number of visitors and ski resorts. So it's really outside the scope of what we're after here. Choice B. Avalanches destroyed at least some buildings in the Sordellian Mountains every year. So if anything, this makes the whole issue more mysterious. If these avalanches are still strong enough to destroy buildings every year, it's even stranger that somehow people are caught less, despite there being more people and more ski resorts. So they still catch buildings, but not people. What is going on? Dun dun dun. It is a mystery. Choice C. People planning new ski slopes and other resort facilities used increasingly accurate information about which locations are likely to be in the path of avalanches. So what this choice says is that as the new resorts came about, the planning moved the people away from avalanche areas, which in theory could cause a decrease in the number of avalanche victims. So that sounds good. We needed the avalanches to be less dangerous. In this particular case, they're not technically less dangerous, they're just not where the people are. So it amounts to the same thing for our purposes, but let's keep looking. Choice D. The average length of stay for people visiting the Sordellian Mountains increased slightly. So this is another one that would make the facts, the data in the passage, more strange. If people are actually staying longer, it increases their exposure to the possibility of being caught in an avalanche. So more people, more resorts, and staying longer, but still somehow fewer incidents, certainly doesn't do anything to explain it. Just makes it weirder. So it's not D. Lastly, choice E. Construction of new ski resorts often led to the clearing of wooded areas that had helped to prevent avalanches. So this is another one that makes the information in the passage weirder. If they were clearing out wooden areas that prevented avalanches, not only should we have had more people caught in avalanches, but we should have actually had more avalanches. And I guess actually the passage only says that there's been no reduction. No reduction could mean that they also increased. So choice D or choice E is totally not what we want either. Leaving us with choice C, the happy one, giving us a reason why the same number of avalanches could be less dangerous even though there are more people. So we're still on page 39. But now we are on question 34. So, a year ago, Dietz Foods launched a year-long advertising campaign for its canned tuna. Last year, Dietz sold 12 million cans of tuna compared to the 10 million sold during the previous year, an increase directly attributable to new customers brought in by the campaign. Profits from the additional sales, however, were substantially less than the cost of the advertising campaign. Clearly, therefore, the campaign did nothing to further Dietz's economic interests. Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? So the argument in this case, we always want to start with the conclusion because that's the thing we need to reverse. So in this one, it's the last sentence. Clearly, therefore, the campaign did nothing to further Dietz's economic interests. We need a way for the advertising campaign to have furthered Dietz's economic interests in spite of the campaign costing more than the increase in profits. So the extra 2 million cans of tuna brought them in less money than they spent on this advertising campaign. So economic interest is a pretty broad category. This will certainly test your business brain knowledge since you're going on to do an MBA. So we need something that furthers their economic interests beyond just the profits. Choice A. Sales of canned tuna account for a relatively small percentage of Dietz Foods profits. So the sales accounting for a small percentage certainly minimizes the quote-unquote damage that would have been caused by this costly advertising campaign that increased their sales, but not their profits, or not their profits proportionally. But this doesn't actually weaken the argument that it did nothing to further their economic interests. If anything, it makes it even more likely that the conclusion is true. So if they did this, and this is still a small percentage of their revenue or profits, this really can't be the answer choice. We need something that makes it worth their while to have basically lost money. Choice B. Most of the people who bought Dietz's canned tuna for the first time as a result of the campaign were already loyal customers of other Dietz products. So again, it might have been furthered their economic interest if this brought in new customers, new brand loyalty, but this is basically saying that the people who tried tuna for the first time were already buying the other things anyway. So this again would actually strengthen the conclusion or strengthen the argument presented in the passage. So this is actually the reverse of what we're after. Choice C. A less expensive advertising campaign would have brought in significantly fewer new customers for Dietz's canned tuna than did the campaign Dietz Foods launched last year. Good to know. And so it certainly implies that the campaign that they did the amount that they spent was proportionate to the amount that they gained. However, it's that proportion that's in question, that basically the lack of further profit made it against their economic interests. Even if they had spent less and brought in fewer people, that would have still been true, because again, the cost did outweigh the benefit. So choice C gives us additional information about the nature of the campaign, but does not weaken the argument that it wasn't in their economic interests. Choice D, Dietz made money on sales of canned tuna last year. Well, it's actually clear that they made money. It does say that they did make profits from the additional sales, not just additional revenue. They did make profits. So we actually already knew that they made money on sales of canned tuna last year. However, what we're after is the fact that those profits were less than what the advertising cost. So it's not just economic benefits are not just about profits. So that leaves us with choice E, so it's a pretty likely bet that this is the right one, but let's look at it anyway. So in each of the past 5 years, there was a steep industry-wide decline in sales of canned tuna. So what this means, basically, it's a twofold benefit, basically, to Dietz's economic interests. Number one, of course, if all of the industry's profits are down, the fact that they sold more is fantastic. Also, if there's an industry-wide slump and they actually gained consumers, they actually sold more cans of tuna, they may well have increased their market share. So those two things are definitely factors in furthering Dietz's economic interest, even though the ad campaign cost more than it made in the additional sales. Presumably, when the industry-wide decline in sales of canned tuna is over, the additional customers that they gained will help even more. So choice E is awesome. It gives us other economic interests of Dietz's to benefit, and choice E is the one. Alright, I think we are done with critical reasoning. Yes, we are done with critical reasoning. So, erase both of these. And we turn the page and begin sentence correction. Sentence correction starts on page 40 with question number 35. I'm moving the letters over to the left here because we may end up, or it's going to be me. I may end up writing more about some of these particular answer choices to explain what's wrong with them. So a few words about sentence correction strategy, or at least the strategy that I'm going to be using. The first thing I do when I'm reading sentence correction questions is decide whether it could be correct as written, to see whether I notice anything that's definitely wrong. The second step is, if there is something definitely wrong, look for other answer choices that repeat that same error, because then that allows me to quickly eliminate one or more other answer choices, often, saving me that much more time. I don't even have to look at the rest of those answers. A lot of times there's more than one error in a given answer choice. I don't need to read the rest to see what the other errors are. I can just move on to the ones that remain. And then basically, then I start going through the answer choices looking for other mistakes. And the technique is what I call a vertical scan. And this won't work in answer choice, or this won't work as well in answer choices where the whole sentence or most of it is underlined, so it's a big long passage. But a lot of times you can actually just move your eye up and down the answer choices, looking for the same thing in different answer choices and eliminating on that basis. And then finally, just as a check at the end, I read the answer choice that I've chosen back into the question and make sure that it sounds right. It's worth your time. It takes an extra. Well, it'll take longer when I do it out loud, but when you do it on the real GMAT, it's only an extra couple seconds, and it may allow you to catch yourself before you choose an incorrect answer. So, and I'll also be talking about what things run through my mind as I'm reading these things, so that you too can pick up some of the pattern recognition. So, number 35. Unlike the buildings in Mesopotamian cities, which were arranged haphazardly, the same basic plan was followed for all cities of the Indus Valley, with houses laid out on a north-south, east-west grid, and houses and walls were built of standard-size bricks. Okay. Couple issues come to mind. One is that the first and foremost one is that we're dealing with a comparison. So whatever is after the word unlike, the thing that we're comparing it to needs to be something similar. So in this particular sentence, which is our choice A, we are comparing the buildings in Mesopotamian cities to the same basic plan. Very likely we actually need to be comparing things that are parallel. Well, we always need to be comparing things that are parallel, although sometimes what the basis for comparison is can be different. So in one sentence, it might not be appropriate to compare apples and oranges, but in another sentence it might if you're just comparing them as two different types of fruit. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes parallelism can be a little bit different and interesting. We actually have a question like that coming up. In this particular case, though, we need to either compare the buildings in Mesopotamian cities or the city plans. City plans and buildings don't have that much in common, so they need to be parallel. So choice A compares the buildings to the same basic plan, and it can't be right. Choice B compares the buildings to the same basic plan, so it can't be right. Choice C compares the arrangement in the first part, and then cities in the second part, and that can't be right. Choice D, our first word after unlike is Mesopotamian cities. We fast forward to what it's being compared to after the phrase that's set apart by commas. That one also has the cities, so choice D is still possible. Choice E, Mesopotamian cities, blah 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 blah, the same basic plan. Do note it's actually not usually going to be that easy. They will almost always give you at least two answer choices that have the correct form of comparison, forcing you to eliminate answer choices based on other errors. In this particular case, choice D is the only one that has a parallel comparison. There are a few other errors in here and a few other differences. I just wanted to note one of them is in the word haphazardly, which means not in any particular arrangement. The choice A, D, and E all use the adverb haphazardly. And this is an issue that comes up repeatedly on the GMAT, adjectives versus adverbs. We'll get more into that as we go. But so A, D, and E all correctly use the adverb. The adverb is usually the shortest, most concise, least wordy way of explaining how things were done. Adverbs can modify nouns, verbs, and adjectives, verbs, and other adverbs. Adjectives can only modify nouns. So this is compared then to choice B, which says haphazard in arrangement. So you can call things haphazard in arrangement, but remember the GMAT hates extra words. As much as the GMAT loves parallelism and the two of them should be married, the GMAT hates extra words. And so if you can say the same thing with fewer words, you should do so on the GMAT. In real life, of course, feel free to use phrases like haphazard in arrangement if you think that sounds better. On the GMAT, it doesn't. And then choice C just uses the adjective haphazard. So it says, the arrangement of buildings in Mesopotamian cities which were haphazard. Here we're talking about the cities or the buildings which were haphazard, as opposed to the arrangement, which is not what we're after. We're after the arrangement being disorderly, not the buildings themselves. So our final step is reading our answer choice back in to make sure it sounds right. So unlike Mesopotamian cities, in which buildings were arranged haphazardly, the cities of the Indus Valley all followed the same basic plan, and so this use of the colon, rather than being a list, is a short form of saying, namely that. Okay, so they all followed the same basic plan. Houses were laid out on a north, south, east, west grid, and houses and walls were built of standard size bricks. So choice D is our correct answer. So still on page 40, question number 36. So new data from United States Forest Service ecologists show that for every dollar spent on controlled small-scale burning, forest thinning, and the training of fire management personnel, it saves $7 that would not be spent on having to extinguish big fires. So this is another one that features comparisons. And again, we need our comparisons to be as parallel as possible. So on this one, we're comparing dollars spent to dollars spent, or I guess action of the Forest Service to a different action of the Forest Service. Those two things need to be parallel. We should not be comparing actions to dollars or dollars to actions. They need to be the same thing. So choice A, the new data show that for every dollar spent, so here we have dollars in the first part, it saves, the bit after the comma. So here we're comparing dollars to an action. Which is not a parallel comparison, and it can't be choice A. Let's look for other answer choices that do the same thing. Maybe we can save ourselves some time. Choice B has for every dollar, blah, 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 $7. Okay, that could work. Choice C, for every dollar, words, saves $7. We may have to come back to C. I'm a little bit unhappy with that one. Choice D, for every dollar, blah, 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 it saves. That can't be right. So this is another dollar, it saves. Can't be right. Choice E, for every dollar spent, words, $7 are saved. Okay, so we're down to B, C, and E. So this is much more typical. Errors found in the initial answer choice will usually allow you to eliminate one or two other answer choices. Okay, so now we start looking for other issues. Another big one that we do a vertical scan down the first words of the different answer choices. A, B, and C begin with the word that. Choices D and E do not. The correct idiom here is, since the main verb is in the not underlined portion, the part before our underlining, we have our main verb show. So you show that X, or show. You can just show X. Let me think. Is that true? No, I don't think so. When you're showing an action or something like that, it always has to be show that. So answer choices that begin without the word that can't be right, which in this case are D and E. We already eliminated D. We have no that on this one. Choice E also. No word that. These notes that I'm making are more than you would do on your own paper on test day. Unless it's absolutely essential to you that you remember, in which case, I mean, if you get every single sentence correction question that you see correct by writing things like this down, and you still finish the test on time, maybe you should go ahead and do that. Realistically, though, it's less likely to be as valuable as just crossing off the answer choices once you've eliminated them. So we're down to B and C, and we already decided that we didn't like C because of basically in every other case, when I looked at for every dollar spent and then I was saying words, the words that were coming after were a phrase that were set apart by commas. Choice C does not have that phrase set apart by a comma before we find out what we're comparing our dollars to, and that made me suspicious. So let's actually read C in full and see what it says. So, do the data show that for every dollar spent on controlled small-scale burning, forest thinning, and the training of fire management personnel saves $7 on not having? There's our problem right there. basically, if you weren't reading the rest of the sentence very carefully, uh, basically everything after the last comma would be correct on its own if the stuff before it were different. It could say, the training of fire management personnel saves $7. Well, it couldn't really say on not having to extinguish. That's definitely wordy. But the training of fire management personnel could be the subject of saves if we didn't already have a subject of the sentence. So, or the clause in this case. So choice C basically changes the nature of the sentence midstream and makes it not a sentence anymore. Get rid of you. Which leaves us with choice B. Let's read it back in and make sure that we're happy with it. So new data from United States Forest Service ecologists show that for every dollar spent on controlled small-scale burning, forest thinning, and the training of fire management personnel, $7 are saved that would have been spent on extinguishing big fires. That sounds great. Choice B it is. And it turns out that that's the right one. Actually, it'd be really bad if on the OGTV I started steering you towards wrong answers. So probably every one that I select is going to be right, but still, we're modeling good behavior here. On to the next page. Okay, so number 37 on page 41. So like the grassy fields and old pastures that the upland sandpiper needs for feeding and nesting when it returns in May after wintering in the Argentine pampas, the sandpiper's vanishing in the northeastern United States is a result of residential and industrial development and of changes in farming practices. So this is another one. This is another comparison. It starts off with the word like. So when the sentence starts off with the word like or unlike, one of the first things you should be thinking is this is a comparison and it needs to be parallel. So here we're comparing, it looks like, grassy fields and old pastures to sandpipers vanishing. And so this is an instance where at first you may say, oh, we can't compare pastures and fields to sandpipers. That's dumb. You can't compare birds to plots of land. In this particular case, we can, because we're after the second part of the sentence tells us that the sandpipers are vanishing as a result of residential and industrial development. So if, or in the way that, both sandpipers and these grassy fields and old pastures are both disappearing as a result of residential and industrial development, then we can compare them. So what the sentence really needs then in terms of a parallel comparison is we either need to compare the vanishing of both things or compare both things and talk about how they are vanishing. We can't compare the vanishing of the one to the actual other things. We can't talk about vanishing fields and sandpipers, or the vanishing of the fields and sandpipers. We either need to compare nouns or, actions. Okay. So choice A is comparing grassy fields to sandpipers, so that's still okay. Choice B has the bird is comparing grassy fields to the bird, that's okay. C is comparing fields to the birds themselves, still okay. Note that the first thing that you choose for as something that's wrong in the passage may not lead to a lot of crossing off. But in choice D, we're comparing grassy fields to sandpipers vanishing. So that's the type of comparison we don't want. Fields versus vanishing. It's naughty. And choice E, we're comparing fields in the non-underlined portion to the sandpipers vanishing. So that's another fields versus vanishing. Get rid of that one. So we are down to 3 after all. So now we also have to look at the verb itself. So in the underlined portion. So the first part of the sentence, the non-underlined portion, is a dependent clause. You can't just say as a complete sentence, like the grassy fields and old pastures, blah blah blah. You can't start. So like the dog, that's not a complete sentence. You can say like the dog, the cat wants its food when I get home in the evening. So you can say that, but the like the dog part is not its own sentence. So the main part of the sentence is the part that's underlined. We need a subject and a verb. In choice A, the subject is the sandpipers. The sandpipers vanishing in the northeastern United States. However, the verb here is is. We can't say the sandpipers is a result. That's naughty. We have a plural subject and a singular verb. So sandpipers is bad. The second one, choice B, we want a subject and a verb that match. The bird itself is vanishing as a result of blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, bird itself is vanishing. That sounds good. Choice C, the birds themselves are vanishing. Okay, that we can say too. We can talk about the bird itself using the species as a singular, or the birds, all of them out there in the plural form. Now we just have to differentiate between B and C, and we have to dig a little bit deeper. So we'll read the whole thing. Choice B, the bird itself is vanishing in the northeastern United States as a result of residential and industrial development and of changes in farming practices. Choice C says that the birds themselves are vanishing in the northeastern United States is due to residential and industrial development and changes to farming practices. So here we have a problem actually with the very beginning of choice C makes it clear that it's not right. We can't begin with the word that. That, starting a sentence like this, creates a subordinate clause as well, just as the beginning of the main passage, the way it begins with like. Starting this phrase with that, it can't stand on its own as a sentence, and so it can't be the independent clause. Every sentence needs at least one independent clause, something that can stand on its own as a sentence. So choice C is eliminated on the basis of its first word. Because then right. And then we have an extra verb in choice C. So that leaves us with choice B. Choice C had a problem with that. So we'll read it back in. So like the grassy fields and old pastures that the upland sandpiper needs for feeding and nesting when it returns in May after wintering in the Argentine pampas, the bird itself is vanishing in the northeastern United States as a result of residential and industrial development and of changes in farming practices. The other thing that choice B has going forward is parallelism as a result of X and of Y, whereas choice C had due to development and changes too. So we didn't have two development and two changes, due to. So choice C was also not parallel. Choice B it is. On to number 38. Still page 41. Okay. The results of two recent unrelated studies support the idea that dolphins may share certain cognitive abilities with humans and great apes. The studies indicate dolphins as capable of recognizing themselves in mirrors, an ability that is often considered a sign of self-awareness, and to grasp spontaneously the mood or intention of humans. So there's a couple things that we can identify. The first one that jumps out at me as I'm reading this is that studies should indicate that XYZ, not just indicate XYZ. So we can immediately eliminate choice A has no that. Also choices B and C do not have the word that beginning the answer choices, so we can get rid of each of them, actually. So choices D and E are our only ones left that have the word that. What's the difference between D and E? Let's see. So we have, it looks like we have some differences in the main verb. So choice D has that dolphins have the ability of recognizing themselves in mirrors, an ability that is often considered as a sign of self-awareness, and spontaneously grasping. Choice E says that dolphins are capable of recognizing themselves in mirrors, an ability that is often considered a sign of self-awareness and of spontaneously grasping. Well, there's actually a couple things wrong with choice D that are not wrong with choice E. One of them is parallelism. Choice E says dolphins are capable of recognizing and of spontaneously grasping. So they're capable of X and of Y. Choice D they have the ability of recognizing and spontaneously grasping. On top of that, normally the correct idiom is not ability of, it's ability to. So it has ability of, they're not parallel. Also, there's another incorrect idiom in that in the middle bit, the part set off by the dashes. An ability that is often considered as a sign of self-awareness. The idiom for the word consider is you consider X, Y. I considered it good. I consider him a friend. You do not say I consider him to be a friend. I think of it as good. Yeah, I think of it as a good thing. I consider it as a good thing. You can say I think of it as a good thing, but consider, the idiom is consider X, Y. So choice E also messes up consider. Or choice D messes up consider. So choice E is our correct one, and we can move on to the next one. Still on page 41, number 39. So according to scholars, the earliest writing was probably not a direct rendering of speech, but was more likely to begin as a separate and distinct symbolic system of communication, and only later merged with spoken language. So this doesn't sound quite right to me as is. We have basically three verbs that are going on here. We have earliest writing was not, was this, and also was more likely to begin. Normally, when you have adjectives and adverbs in the form with the word more, when you say more X, you can say things kind of absolutely. You can say she found it more difficult. But if you say that something is more likely to, that's an I. I'm just going to erase that. That looks terrible. When you use a phrase like more likely to, you really are expecting a word than later. He's more likely to do X than to do Y. Yeah, basically you're looking for a parallel comparison. Choice A, or the sentence as written, has this phrase more likely to, in this case, begin, without saying what it's more likely than. So that's a problem. So it's not going to be choice A. Looking down the list, we have two answer choices that start with more than likely, and then two that begin with it was more. In choice D, more than likely, and it was more likely. So in this split, we look for parallelism. In the non-underlined portions, we have the earliest writing was X, then the underlined portion, and only later merged. So two past tense verbs in a list form. When you have verbs in a list, you can't say it was, it was, and was, and replace was with any other past tense verb. You only say the subject once. You should be saying it, blanked was something, and then was. You only have the subject once. If you repeat the subject, it messes up the parallelism of the list, which begins after the word it. So because the two non-underlined portions are simple past tense verbs, having the subject again in choices D and E, it is a problem in those two guys, and we can get rid of them. So we're left with choices B and C, more than likely began as and more than likely beginning from. And the same thing that we were just talking about, this parallelism between, in the verb forms, we have was not in the first one, and then we have merged in the third item in the list. So we need another past tense verb, which is clearly began rather than more than likely beginning. So choice C has beginning, which is a participle rather than a verb, and that makes it incorrect. So we needed a parallel was, began, and merged. That's the happy parallel form for our three verbs in the list. I can't let this one go without talking about a significant issue with the explanation of this problem in the official guide. Now, I don't want to be the guy who talks about how the official guide is wrong. I do need to talk about how it is actually very misleading in the explanation to this question. It says some things that if you aren't thinking carefully and aren't as familiar with English, it could be very confusing. So on page 96, that's where the explanation is. I'm just going to zip forward there. So it says in the explanation on page 96, when more is used in the comparative form of an adjective, like more difficult, or an adverb, like more likely, it is followed by than. The words used to show the comparison between X and Y, but more than likely must also introduce the correct verb form, blah, blah, blah. This is not strictly speaking true, actually. The issue here is the difference between saying whether something is more. It's the placement of than. You do not need to have a word than after every time you have the word more, which is what this implies. It says when more is used in the comparative form of an adjective or adverb, it is followed by than. That is not true. So you can say something is more likely. You can say something is more likely than some other thing. You can also use the expression more than likely, and the placement of than actually changes the meaning of the sentence. And it's not incorrect, the answer choice that they have, where we use the phrase more than likely, but it doesn't mean the same thing. What you can say, X is more likely than Y. You cannot say X is more than, well, you could say X is more than likely Y. You could say the new employee is more than likely a spy from another company. The difference is that when you use an expression like more than likely, you're implying, more than any adjective or adverb. So more, when something is more than X, you're implying a continuum. So on any descriptive thing that you could use, so you could say, if something is likely over here, something could be certain over here. you could have someone who is content, and all the way to the extreme would be perhaps thrilled. So you can say that someone is more than content, and you're implying that they are somewhere further down this on the happiness spectrum than this. If something is more than likely, it's much closer to a mathematical certainty. This is different from just saying that something is more likely to be the case. So this is the part where this question is a little bit misleading. The phrase more than likely in the correct answer choice B is still grammatically correct and does make sense. We can say it was more than likely, or that it more than likely began as a separate and distinct symbolic thing, but you are no longer really making a comparison with an x and a y and and that sort of thing. So the placement of the word than makes a big difference. I just couldn't let this one go because the explanation is a little bit misleading. You can also use the word more without the word than. You can just say she found the test more difficult. Many of her peers got A's on the exam. Sheila found the test more difficult. You don't need to use the word than. So that statement on page 96 is, well, we'll. I don't want to be the guy who's going around saying the OG is wrong. So let's just call it misleading and an overgeneralization. Okay, that's enough on number 39. Let's move on to number 40. Page 41, question 40. I don't have explanations that long for every single answer, for every single question, so you can rest easy. So, in 1995, Richard Stallman, a well-known critic of the patent system, testified in patent office hearings that, to test the system, a colleague of his had managed to win a patent for one of Kirchhoff's laws, an observation about electric current first made in 1845 and now included in virtually every textbook of elementary physics. So nothing about this jumps out at me. There may be, and even when nothing jumps out at you as incorrect in the sentence as written, you should always still go through the answer choices. The GMAT is tricky enough that they could simply give you something that is more concise in the answer choices, or something that is somehow more clear. Also keep in mind that there are things grammatically correct on the GMAT that are stylistically, for the GMAT's notions of appropriate writing, incorrect. So just because something is grammatically correct as written in the sentence does not mean that it is the correct answer. Choice A, as it stands, is all right. Didn't mean to make the smile so crooked, but I guess we are a little bit suspicious not having read the other answer choices. So, and in this particular case, we notice that there are two verbs in the sentence. So the colleague of his managed sorry, wait, hang on. Yeah, sorry. The underlined portion is the beginning of basically what's a restatement of one of Kirchhoff's laws. So the underlined portion is restating what that is, an observation, blah, blah, blah. An observation that has two parts. An observation that was first made in 1845, and it's now included. Included is not underlined, so whatever the verb is, in the underlined portion, it needs to parallel the past tense included. So, choice B. Patent for one of Kirchhoff's laws, which was an observation about electric current first made in 1845, and it is now included. Normally when you use a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction like and, that's a you expect a comma joining the two clauses. So we can say that it was an observation and it is, but you expect a comma. So x, comma, and other thing. Also, it's just wordy to say which was an observation. We can simply restate it as an observation. Kirchhoff's laws, one of Kirchhoff's laws, an observation that blah, blah, blah. So choice B, wordy, punctuation, not B. It's wordy and there's punctuation. It doesn't have wordy punctuation. Choice C, patent for one of Kirchhoff's laws. Namely, it was an observation about electric current first made in 1845 and now included in virtually every textbook of elementary physics. In this particular case, again, it was an observation, extra wordy. Don't need to say that. We can just rename it as an observation. That alone is enough to knock this one out. Choice D, one of Kirchhoff's laws, an observation about electric current first made in 1845. It is now included in virtually every textbook. So we don't have the problem with the wordy renaming of the observation. We just call it an observation. However, when you join two sentences or two independent clauses together without any sort of conjunction or a semicolon, it's what's called a run-on sentence. A run-on sentence is not necessarily a long sentence. This is a run-on sentence. I walked, I sang. Each of those could stand on its own as its own sentence. I walked. You can say that. I sang. You can say that. You can't put them together with just a comma. So that's what's called a run-on sentence or a comma splice, because you're splicing two independent clauses together with just a comma. That's what makes choice D wrong. Just note that you can avoid this by either making this a semicolon instead of a comma, or adding a coordinating conjunction like and. That's a semicolon, not the letter J. Anyway, it's not choice D for that reason. Choice E, one of Kirchhoff's laws, that was an observation about electric current, first made in 1845 and is now included blah blah blah. One of the big issues here is about the modifying phrase first made in 1845. So modifying phrases like this that are modifying a particular element of the sentence should always be as close as possible to the thing they're modifying. First made in 1845 grammatically is most likely referring to electric current, which was not first made in 1845. So that's certainly unclear. Context may tell us, and again, in real English, context allows you to say and do a lot of things that grammatically you probably ought not. For clarity in writing and on the GMAT, modifying phrases need to be as close as possible to the thing they modify. And in particular, this is because it's set off by commas. In the correct answer, it's all in the same phrase. An observation about electric current first made. Both about electric current and first made are modifying observation. In this one, once you set off the modifying phrase with commas, it's modifying the thing you just said. In this case, electric current. So it's not choice E. Which leads us back to choice A, as written. And let's just read it back in. So in 1995, Richard Stallman, a well-known critic of the patent system, testified in patent office hearings that, to test the system, a colleague of his had managed to win a patent for one of Kirchhoff's laws, an observation about electric current first made in 1845, and now included in virtually every textbook of elementary physics. So it has parallelism, the electric current, the observation first made and now included. The whole phrase is in apposition. It's a restatement of the notion of one of Kirchhoff's laws, and it doesn't introduce any extra words as some of the other things did around the word observation. So choice A is correct. I'm not sure I can get through one more in 4 minutes. I think it's not worth it to rush. Let me just take a look at that next one to see if I can do it. No, I don't think that's a good idea. Anyway, so ending a couple minutes early today. Again, my name's Jim Jacobson. You've been watching and listening to GMAT OGTV on Grockit, and we're going through the questions one by one, giving you the answers and explanations that you